sure you're awake. It's helping me as well. Thank you so much. Right, we've got really an amazing lineup this afternoon. We're going to have a good time. First up, we have the future of news, how creators and influencers are reshaping journalism. Of course, we know the future of news is not just being shaped by journalists, but by these creators and influencers who really command massive audiences. They set the agenda, they do things that traditional media, sometimes struggles to do, but it does all raise new questions about accountability and about trust. This panel is all about that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage the moderator from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, Director Mitali Mukherjee, who will introduce the panel. Let's give them a round of applause.
Wow.
Look at this.
I know. Here we are.
It's so formal.
I know. Everybody's so
Well behaved.
Right, and quiet. Hi, everybody. Wow. How are you guys? Everybody's
Wait,
so
that's
quiet.
my cue. Hi, good evening. It's good to see a full house. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. I'm director of the Reuters Institute for Journalism, a part of the University of Oxford. It's a pleasure to see everyone here. It's been a fantastic day, I think. I've been sort of soaking in a lot of conversations around economics, business, finance, news. And I think where we come from as an institute is that the core of what we focus on, which we think is a critical component, is the audience. And some of our research over the past couple of years has been focusing on exactly what you're going to hear from these bright folks, which is what's happening in terms of a shift amongst audiences towards what we call, as a broad bracket, news creators, but that tends to bring in a lot within it. So one of the things that we have been seeing over the last few years is that increasingly young audiences especially have been turning to spaces that are online, so primarily social media platforms, and turning to individuals rather than organizations, which is news creators. They have an impact on public debate. They have a large audience. They tend to have quite often clear political sides, and our audiences do sort of identify with that. And this isn't a phenomenon that we're seeing worldwide, but it is something that is beginning to grow in terms of its heft. So you certainly saw that in the pre-election campaign with Donald Trump, and you are beginning to see that in countries like France. You're seeing it in other parts of global majority countries like India as well. So very, very fascinating trends. That's what we're going to dive into over the course of the next very snappy 40 minutes. And I've got some bright stars here, some of whom did the introductions for themselves. But maybe I will give this a shot. So please introduce with a generous applause, first and foremost, FTMM founder Tala Palmeri, Daily Wire co-founder, and the Ben Shapiro Show host Ben Shapiro, Lemon Media Network founder Don Lemon, and the David Pakman Show host David Pakman. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining in. So we're going to make the best use of our time, and let's start with a crunchy sort of context-setting conversation. For those who may not have come across your work, Tara, maybe I'll start with you. A little bit about sort of your journey to here, why you chose to, because you are one of those who was sort of in the traditional news media space and then shifted to going solo, why you chose to do that, and how you sort of differentiate or define the work that you're doing now versus what you were doing earlier.
I would say that I am now chasing the audience, because the audience is no longer watching television anymore. Yeah. They are on their phones, they're watching YouTube, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. And I started doing this a few years ago when I joined Puck. I was at Politica, where I wrote a newsletter, which was how people were getting their news, and they still are. And then I made my way to Puck, and then I had a podcast with The Ringer there. And this just felt like the next evolution, to have a YouTube show and to have a Substack, when that is how so many people are getting their news, and then creating reels and shorts for X and Instagram and TikTok. And I felt that I could apply the same rigor of investigative journalism, analysis, just seeking the truth, and that being my guiding force and light in this, rather than politics, commentary, identity. I really feel like what I am seeking is the same thing that I did at a newsroom, that like ABC News where I worked, or Politico, or the New York Post, or the Washington Examiner. I now have the ability as an independent journalist to pursue the stories I want to without having to, think about, does this fit into the identity of a network, or is this something that my editors would like? I can just chase the stories that I've always wanted to, and have really anyone I want on to interview and pursue accountability journalism. And I think I've been doing this for 17 years, so I understand standards of journalism, and I understand how to break through with real reporting. And I'm just using creator platforms now. And I'm using some of the tools that they have used and become so great at, like the authenticity, the showing of the process, talking through with the audience, creating a dialogue. I see that has really worked to rebuild trust. And I think, why not do that with traditional journalism?
And what's the story arc, if you will?
I mean, the story arc is that obviously I'm an opinion journalist. My opinion is very clear to people. I'm openly conservative. I don't try to hide the ball on that. I don't pretend at objectivity. I try to separate between what I think are the facts, which very often is relying on traditional news gathering sources, and then my opinion, which I'm drawing on my ideology or my centralized values. I've been doing this for quite a long time. I started writing a syndicated column when I was 17. The Daily Wire launched about a decade ago in my co-founder Jeremy Boring's pool house with a couple of podcasts. Obviously, my podcast grew to be quite large. Our company currently does $200 million a year in revenue and is quite a large conservative media company with a reportorial contingent. We have some investigative reporters. We have a White House reporter, but remains a largely opinion-based outlet. And so our audience understands who we are, and because of that, they know that we're not hiding the ball. We're not trying to lie about where we are coming from. The news is refracted through the prism of our values. And again, I try to be very clear on my own show between what is fact and what is my opinion, but I think that that's part of the trust that I have with the audience.
Would it be fair to say you've moved on from the news creator to a standalone brand?
I think that is fair, although I think that the silos there are probably a little bit overdrawn. I don't know what it means to be a news creator as opposed to a standalone brand. I think you can be a news creator within the standalone brand or vice versa.
Don Lemon.
Yes.
The story. Lemonheads, is that what you encourage your followers to call?
Yeah, the Lemonheads.
Yeah, tell us the story.
Well, so what's the question?
What's the story of why you decided to transition away from mainstream media, a space like CNN?
Well, I got pushed out of mainstream media. So.
Just as long as I'm not saying it and you are.
I think but honestly, no, it's okay. I mean, it's reality, and I'm about that and about truth. But I mean, if one of the CMO of my former company said, that if you open you're a walking definition of a blessing in disguise, because I think I got out at the right time, and I know that in the coming months, in the coming years, there are going to be people who will have to they'll be forced to do what I'm doing now. I didn't have to do this, but I still had more to say. But so what I'm doing is I'm going where the audience is, and the audience is right here on this device or on a tablet, and less so on giant televisions, even though my audience, when I look at my analytics, most people watch me on television. I think it's like 44%, and there's like 42% who watch me on a smartphone, and then it goes on from there to tablets or whatever. But I'm going where the audience is, and I think that people want personality now. They're not getting news from a brand or letters or whatever. They're coming for people who are authentic, people they trust, people they like, and they don't need the filter of a face full of makeup or a cocktail dress or a suit or hair that's over hairsprayed and a shiny desk and flashing. They want to get their information from people they like and trust without all the filters. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just leaning. I don't even have a desk anymore because I don't want that between me and my audience. No barrier.
David, were you thrown out? Did you write a newsletter when
I
you were
wasn't thrown out, no. Very different path.
Wasn't quite thrown. I was like pushed.
No, I came more from the business world, actually, and I saw a lot of my MBA colleagues becoming bankers, financial advisors, private equity people, and that did not appeal to me. So I was able to take a year and say, I'm going to try to see if this could be a viable business, and if it's not, maybe I'll end up as a financial advisor after all. And fortunately for me, that didn't happen. And I started early enough that it's been interesting. You talk about the desk. There's been this transition where there are these communicators of authority and credibility that have really changed over time, because there was a point when I started where if it didn't look like you were on a CNN set, there was an instant judgment from the audience that this is not credible, and that has really changed over time. In fact, to the point where audiences like mine and maybe some of yours, they see that kind of more traditional staid look, and they say, this feels stuffy. I actually want something different. And I think that we've benefited from timing and also technologically widespread high-speed internet access, a 95% reduction in the cost of the audiovisual equipment that we used. All of those things happened for me at an incredibly convenient time where I was able to take a shot at this that would have been impossible 20, 30 years ago.
My channel was stagnant when I started. I rented this big studio in Midtown and spent all this money on cameras and lights or whatever, and so it was fine, but it wasn't growing. And one day I said, you know what, I'm just going to sit in my living room in front of the fireplace, and I'm going to do a show every day called Live at 5. It wasn't new. Anyone remember Sue Simmons and Chuck Scarborough back in the 80s, whatever, 70s, doing Live at 5? And that's when the audience started to grow, when I put on a sweatshirt and sat in front of my fireplace and just started talking, not at them, but kind of with them, and taking the comments and doing stories that they were interested in doing. And that's when my channel started to grow.
Do you have a sense of the demographics of your audience mix? What does it look like?
My audience is heavily women, mostly women, but probably it's about 60% women, maybe even 70% women, the rest guys. The interesting thing is that people in traditional media, corporate media, they're constantly chasing the young demo, which is great because I do have a young demo, but I guess a blessing for me is coming from cable news where the demo is much older. So now when we have like open enrollment for healthcare, they're looking for me, or in Medicare, they're looking for someone who has an older demographic. So I just think right now is a boon and an opportunity for us, and I don't think I know it's not an opportunity for people who are in traditional corporate media.
Yeah, and I want to keep dipping into our research just to provide some perspective to this conversation, which is that in the US as a market, around a quarter of the audiences that we surveyed said that they turned to news creators for the news, which is almost equal to the number of people who said they turned to traditional news brands. So very much neck and neck in the US as a market. And that still puts it in the middle of the range. There are markets where news creators have sort of outpaced. And of course, there are markets where news creators still remain far behind from traditional news brands. But Ben, let me ask you this. If you were to drill it down to what you think is the USP of what you present and what's resonating with your audience, what would you point to?
Values authenticity. So I think that the word authenticity has come up a lot, and obviously I think that is the correct word. The problem with authenticity is that it is not really a substitute for credibility, meaning there are lots and lots of people on the internet who are authentic and who are absolutely non-credible and spew bullshit all the time, for lack of a better word. And their authenticity can be pure. I mean, absolutely pure. They absolutely believe the bullshit that they're spewing at any given time. And so if an audience links up with that, they're going to get a bunch of bad information. And so actually, I think that the sort of moral duty of people in our space is actually higher than maybe it would be in a system that has more checks and balances, like a major news network or some sort of outlet. And so something that I personally try to take very seriously is the idea that I do have an audience. I'm speaking to them. It's my job to make them smarter, not stupider. It's my job to provide them with some level of context and knowledge, and not just to say the things that may affirm their worldview, even if it feels good to them and feels good to me, and may even, in fact, be helpful to the numbers to sort of just reaffirm whatever the viewer wants to hear.
How do you construct that firewall, if you will, of what sort of the rules of the game are, or what the moral rules are? And are you transparent about communicating that to the audiences? Is that something you sort of work at?
I mean, sure. I mean, my audience, I think, has known me for a while. Again, I'd be sort of the legacy side of the new media because my company is now a decade old, which means it's actually one of the older new media companies in many ways. Because of that, I think that, as I said, my broadcasting and my coverage is refracted through a set of values. I prize my values more than I prize political victory. And so what that means is that I'm willing to call out my own side when I feel that that's necessary. I obviously am conservative. It means I'm going to be more critical of people who are on the left because I disagree with their ideas more. But I think that what my audience expects from me and would be disappointed in me if I did not do is speak the truth even when it applied to figures who are purportedly on quote-unquote our side.
There are talk to us a little bit about the platforms and this video storytelling, which happens even in sort of very audio native formats. It's still streaming live on YouTube while you're doing a podcast. Was that an interesting shift to make? Why do you think there is the need to do that, to sort of play to both tracks while speaking to the audience?
I think Tara's streaming now, aren't you?
I am streaming. I am streaming right now, yeah. I think...
One wave.
I mean, if you're already recording a podcast, why wouldn't you just put the video on? Yeah. People don't really demand, like Don said, a higher quality in terms of, I mean, I do it out of my house as well. I actually got the advice from Don, don't get a studio, it's a waste of money. I have some lights, could pack them up in a car, and you could do a traveling studio. I do think that the audience, they appreciate seeing you in your home. I mean, I'll get notes about my plants and stuff like that. But they see pictures of me, my journey through life behind me, my ancestors, my trips, my reporting journeys. I just think it's a way to get into your world. I mean, they're kind of buying into you whether you like it or not. And since I'm newer to the independent media world, people are still getting to know me. And sometimes I think like the audience can be disappointed if they think, oh, well, you seem to be too tough on someone who was on the left or too tough on someone who was on the right, and they're confused. And I think like the audience is trying to understand. I'm like, no. I'm not here to reaffirm your worldview. I'm not here to feed you content that you want or only present facts that reaffirm your point of view. I'm just going to interview the person in front of me the same way that I would no matter who they are. And whatever the facts bring me, I will, bring to you. And this is the problem. Like, you can chase an audience, and you can tell them exactly what they want to hear. But is that ethical? I mean, not to me. If that was the only way that I could have a channel, then I wouldn't do it. But I believe there are people out there that do want information that is based in, just actually traditional journalism, but without the corporate hierarchy and all of the politics that you have to go to just get a story actually published. I mean, I've worked in newsrooms before, some of the biggest newsrooms in the world. It can be really hard, and they are very timid when it comes to the facts. And sometimes you just need to be able to say the facts. And the audiences, they'll figure out if you're for them or they're not. But last time I checked, there are millions, 200 million people on YouTube. They'll find you.
It's the largest TV network. It's number one TV network.
I'd rather be there than on TV.
To piggyback on what Ben and Tara said about making a choice about authenticity, feeding the audience what they want, et cetera. I had kind of a tough moment with a part of my audience in the lead up to the last election where I think it must have been September or something like that, where I looked at the polling and I said, listen, we can kind of feel whatever we want about the way this is going, but the polling is worse for Kamala Harris in the 7 key swing states than it was for Biden in 2020. It's worse than it was for Hillary in 2016. I'm just doing, it's not even arithmetic, it's just I'm looking at numbers and telling you what they are. And a very loud, but I think probably small slice of my audience said that we need positivity, that this is not what the moment calls for. And it was a really interesting moment because I could have just gone back to, guys, this looks great, get out there. But it just wasn't what it was. And depending on where you are in your career and kind of like where your show is in terms of maturity, it could be very tempting to kind of go back to what's the easiest thing for your audience.
Because everything is so immediate. If you're doing a YouTube show, I do a live show. When I started, no one wanted video. And it hasn't even been 2 years. That I started about a little over a year and a half ago, and I was pitching my show around, and no one wanted video. And then now everyone wants video. Now people are open to live. People are doing lives. And before it was like, taped content. It monetizes better, and you can, edit it, and it looks better. Now people are open to live. So it's everything is evolving. So I just think that you have to adapt. And he's right. During the election, I would go out because I wanted to hear what people were saying. And I didn't get to do that when I was sitting on a big, shiny anchor desk unless they, teleported you into a certain place. And so I went out to the swing states, battleground states, and just talked to people. And then I started getting calls from Fox News and Newsmax and, oh my gosh, you're getting a lot of Trump out there. You must be really sad. I'm like, no, I'm not. It's a lot of Trump. People are saying they're voting for Trump in places and demographics that you didn't think would be saying that. And I got the same thing. Don, are you curating that? We don't want to hear that. And I say, I'm sorry. I've got to give you the facts. So you can be pressured into having a bias towards just feeding people what they want, whether that's left or right. and you have to fight against that.
In the short term, it's a hit, but in the long term, it's actually an asset.
A recipe for
because in the short term, the easy incentive is to go for the sugar high of giving the audience precisely what they want, but you actually lose your authenticity. You lose what you are when you do that.
Because after the election, people say, Don, you saw it, you called it, and
right.
They respect you for that, and they come back because then they realize you're actually telling them the truth.
Yeah, let me ask you this, David, and then I can get thoughts from all of you and you, Ben, specifically. One of the other things that we see in the US as a market is sort of the polarized nature of how people identify with some of the creators. So if you were to draw down a list between how people identified politically, they would name a wholly different list of 15 personalities if they were, right-leaning versus when they were left-leaning. Do you think that's reflecting an industry dynamic, or do you think that's how the ecosystem has developed online?
Well, I think it's both. I think from the creator perspective, you're starting with what are your values, and hopefully at least, if it's not contrived, what is authentically you, and then that's going to put you somewhere on the political spectrum. I think without a doubt, the way that algorithms engage directly with what triggers the most emotional response is a direct driver of the hyperpolarized nature. And, I'm guilty of it to a degree because I'm in this space. I also try to be honest with my audience about when it comes to things like gas prices and whether a president controls them. I'm very honest that this is overly politicized. It becomes a political football. And the truth is presidents can do a couple of things related to gas prices, and it's mostly not about that. And so I try to balance the fact that I do have a perspective, I do have an opinion, from a moral standpoint about what I think is best, but at the same time, I'm trying to be upfront about the fact that there are things that are completely political, there are things that are outside of that, and hopefully the audience appreciates that over the long term.
Yeah.
The algorithms are destroying America. This is my informed view.
Sounds like it should go.
Yeah, I mean, there we go. Don, look at us come together as soon as So the reason I say this is because the TikTok and X algorithms in particular program for virality.
Yes.
And so they are programming for what is the strongest response, the strongest emotional response. Absolutely can be manipulated by outside actors. You've actually seen quite a bit of this on both TikTok as well as X. But people who are then in the real world use that as a substitute for polling. For example, so you see politicians, and if they get a lot of retweets, they think what they're saying is popular, and then they do more of it. And so you'll see it bleed over into the real world. Trends that you would never get if you just walked around and talked to normal humans suddenly start popping up when you talk around with normal humans because they've been watching it online and it's been really, really pushed. And so when people say, how do we get back to normal, my first recommendation is to do something that actually is the opposite of what our industry should be saying, which is get offline. Like actually turn off your phone and go to a place with actual human beings and have conversations with those people. And this is where I make my non-religious pitch. Everybody needs a form of Sabbath. You should get off your phone on Friday night. You should get back on your phone on Saturday night and just be completely disconnected from everything that's going on and be in a place where everybody who is bonding over values and over shared things. That the more online we are, the more polarized we are. And I think that's been the opposite of the way that we viewed politics for decades in the country. The more informed you are, the better the electorate's going to be. And it turns out that because our informational ecosystem is so polluted and because it is actually programming to the id inside all of us, what that means is that probably the more time you're spending on X or the more time you're spending on TikTok, maybe the less informed you are, and also the more polarized you are, and the more out of touch with reality you are.
That's true. People think that they live on. I have a producer who lives on Twitter, and every time I ask him for something, he goes to Twitter, and I said, "Do you ever do research other than Twitter?"
Like touch some grass.
Yeah, touch some grass. But I do. It's interesting that Ben, you say that because I do every single day. I tell people because I go live at 10 and 5, and I tell them between that they can be informed without being inundated. They can read. And until then, I tell them, until I see you at 5 o'clock, turn the TV off. And
only watch you at 10.
But I mean, turn the TV off or turn your and read and pick your moments. But I rarely do content. Every once in a while, I'll do weekend content because I think it's important to give people a break. And I do think that people should be in community with each other, and that's something that we should all be pushing. It doesn't, you don't make that much more revenue or become that much more successful by constantly pushing, even on the weekends, content.
Yeah,
I think you give people a break and make them want you,
And the two big platforms in the US are X and YouTube. That's kind of the spaces where people are driven to the
Although
most.
TikTok's enormous.
And TikTok's enormous, but it's probably got a bit more. It's not sort of hardcore news, if you will. It's people looking at lifestyle, culture, other things as well. And within X and YouTube, there is sort of a primary preponderance, if you will, of right-wing identified voices. Is there a reason you think for that? Do you think they've sort of moved ahead of the curve and there's more faces emerging from the left? What do you put that down?
I mean, I think that you see this quite frequently in terms of new technologies, that the right is the first to adapt because they feel shut out of traditional spaces. So, for example, the right was very shut out of TV spaces. Cable emerges, Fox News emerges because the right's like, okay, we need some place to go. And then after cable becomes more balanced, MSNBC comes up and CNN. And once you have all those outlets, then the right is like, okay, well, maybe we'll have to try talk radio. Talk radio is now going to be our new things in the 90s, the early 90s, you get that. So the timeline's off here, but that's basically the idea. When the right feels squeezed in a particular legacy space, they're the first to adapt to a new space. And so for me, my op-eds weren't going to be appearing in the New York Times. And so the idea of start your own online outlet is a lot more attractive than somebody who is going to have access to the New York Times. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Tara's former employer, Politico, invited me to write a newsletter for Politico, and there was basically a riot in the newsroom because how dare I write the holy and sanctified Politico morning newsletter. And so the right is the first to adapt, and then what happens is that people realize there's a market there, and they move into that market, and then a new market emerges. So I think there's definitely something to that for sure.
I think that's true, but the left has also been very hesitant to really fund a lot of these operations at a bigger level. And that, I think, has held back also the independent left spaces, where it's mostly people like me who are just building slowly over time. And there really hasn't been any large influx, or especially with younger people as they get into the age where you might think about starting to produce content. It's been missing, and a lot of my colleagues have said we all could have gotten going far more quickly on some of these platforms if someone had recognized the potential more quickly, had come in more rapidly to fill the gap that was then subsequently created as the right came in. There just really hasn't been that funding. It's
a short side on the left, or even center. If you're on the right, what is it? Red Seed Ventures or something like a Red Seed.
You're talking about the company that's associated with Fox
Red Seed Ventures, and you have pouring money into conservative spaces, and you don't see that on the left or even center left or even center right.
They're starting to. They have these like PACs now. What is it called? That all of these creators are part of. Chorus. They're all getting supported through these
But
PACs.
not nearly to the...
No, they're behind, but they didn't need it because they could just go to cable news and get interviews over and over again.
This is really the key, is that a lot of people who would be funders for these sorts of enterprises are like, well, why do I need to fund that? We already own CNN or MSNBC.
That's true. I think they were behind the curve in realizing that the power of that was diminished.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Tara, one question to you before we move from sort of context setting to challenges, which I'm sure there are many of. What also sort of comes through in a lot of our research, and this isn't unique just to the US as a market, is that if you were to map out the top few creators, most often it would be men. And particularly with sort of the political op-ed style of communicating to audiences. Is that a challenge as you see it? Is it a kind of a state of play? How do you approach it?
I just don't think there are as many women doing this yet. I hope to be, there's Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, there are some on the right, and now there are women on the left that are doing it. V. Spare is like a huge star under the desk news. I just think it's maybe taking a little bit longer, and I think eventually it'll be more balanced. I think there will be more women, but all of the polling and everything says that men still will listen to women. Actually, a huge audience of mine is men.
Yeah, I was going to.
It's actually disproportionately more male than female. Men like politics.
That's correct.
So I hope that in a few years from now, it's way more balanced. But I just look at it as the news industry evolved as well. It started off with all men. And
I think if you were to widen from news creators to alternative news creators, people who do other things but also talk about the news, you'd probably have a wider mix gender-wise there.
Yeah, you're also asking us to go out on our own and create our own businesses, create our own platforms, independent media, small businesses essentially is what you're starting at. And so, women have to be incentivized to see that there is revenue there for them. And I think they are seeing it, and I hope to one day be a model for other women who want to do this.
I think you are already. I think you are really a trailblazer doing this.
Thanks.
It's interesting, though, because in America you don't see a lot of women on the news side. You do, you have like Alex Cooper, right, who does, sort of entertainment. No shade to, but it's a whole different thing. It's more of a creator than a journalist. But I find that, I think in Turkey and in other countries, women who give news and information are huge, have independent voices and independent roles, and they're doing really, really well. It's just interesting here in the United States. it hasn't really happened. So
I think when cable news starts to lose more and more journalists, when they, as they continue with their layoffs, as they seem to do, more women who have. I had a unique background. I was a White House correspondent for a network. I already knew how to do broadcast journalism. I was a podcast host. I wrote a newsletter. It made sense. For a lot of people, they may have only been a print reporter their entire life, or they've only been a broadcast journalist. So it was an easier leap for me to do this. And I just think that you just have to take the leap. And I think it's cool to see women doing it all the time. Who knows, maybe we'll create a lady collective or something.
I'm only smiling because I can pick up a trend here. Cable news is on the wane. Stop watching TV. Listen to me at 5. It's kind of, there's a mood here. Let's talk about the challenges. David, maybe start with you and pick up on something that Tara said. It's a treadmill in many ways, isn't it? It's monetization. It's how do I put out more content? How do I get more engagement? How do you manage all of that when you're kind of a one-man, one-woman machine?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of options. One is you really do everything yourself, and you kind of have to enjoy the business side of it. The other is you start to take on a structure that is a little more corporate, and you start delegating in that way, or some combination of the two. I enjoy the business side of it, but I also can't do it myself anymore, so I have a team. There are a lot of people that don't. I think one of the challenges is, as it becomes clear that the independent news space can be lucrative and it can be interesting and you can build a large audience, legacy and corporate media is going to want to come into it, and to a degree they already have. You look at some of the largest YouTube news channels, they are legacy companies that have just dumped huge money to rapidly scale YouTube channels. And so you might start to get that same 80-20 or even 90-10, where overwhelmingly those who come in with the funds are going to very quickly kind of scoop up market share. The other thing that's interesting is for a long time when I was doing this, when new people came into the market, I didn't really see them as competitors in the sense that the pie was growing so quickly that it was just great for everybody. I think now it's starting to get to the point, especially as people can only consume so much stuff in a day, there's 24 hours in a day, et cetera. It's less clear to me now. Like, I do think the spaces are starting to get a little bit more crowded, where there's more of a shift between creators rather than like we're just growing the pie at the same time that everybody's getting their slice. So I don't know where that goes in the next 5 to 8 years.
Don, you
I don't know either. I don't look at people as competitors either. It's interesting because I would look at the folks on other networks when I was in traditional media as competitors, but we support each other. Tara's on my channel all the time. If she invites me to do something, I'll do it. I can call people. I use my own Rolodex as instead of a booker. And I get people to come on who have their own independent channels, and we support each other. In some
ways, is it because you don't have the framework or structure or support that a traditional or legacy news organization could give you, that it's scrappy, of course, but you need to sort of hold each other close?
Yeah, and in terms of what you said about creating the channel, creating channels and legacy media, I don't think that they really had gotten that. I shouldn't probably give away the secret that they don't need to use so many resources to do what they do, because I put on coverage. Jim Acosta, Joy Reid, and I did coverage of 2 different things: a huge protest and I forget what the other event was, and we did it with my small team, which is a team of 4 people doing it. Tara was part of it and we didn't have to have 30 producers and a writer and a control room and all of those things. And it was network quality coverage that people tuned into, and it was actually more interesting because we didn't have it wasn't seen through a corporate filter. We went pushing through a corporate filter and saying, can I say this? Is a boss going to be mad if I happen to insult Donald Trump even inadvertently? Is he going to call the company and say, get rid of that guy on the anchor desk? We don't have those challenges.
Yeah, sure. One is the financial burnout, and the other is the creative burnout. Ben, do you want to jump in on that? WTF shut down.
Yeah, so I believe I have not missed a day of work that was not a company holiday in 4 years, including vacations with my family, right? Because if you're not on the air, then it's not like there's a substitute host on my show, for example. And so, it can burn you out. Plus, this news cycle has been increasingly frenetic for over a decade. And I keep looking around going, when is somebody going to take a breath? And nobody has taken a breath, and it just gets more psychotic every single moment. And so at a certain point, it went from being, fun to kind of a drag. And sometimes it goes back to being fun. But the reality is that like anything else, on a daily basis, it sort of depends on what you're covering, whether it's interesting. The news cycle is so fast now that a cycle that would have taken 2 weeks now takes 2 days. And by day 3, you're kind of bored with the topic already, and you got to move on to the next thing, and so is the audience. And so that's very difficult. In terms of the business, I will say I'm in a bit of a different position because we actually scaled like a very large-scale company. What that meant was bringing on other creators, some for good, some for ill. And I think
talk about that?
Not particularly. But,
#no regrets.
Yeah, regrets. We have a few. But I think that that as all of us kind of mature in our spaces, we're going to have to face a lot of the same questions the legacy media outlets face about who you want on your air. What are the editorial standards? What are the things you have to do? And those are challenges that, thank God we have those challenges because we grew so large, but they are challenges for sure.
Yeah, I realize we're almost at time, and there's so many questions. I apologize we haven't had time because the conversation was so great, but I encourage you to find the news creators and speak to them. But let me close with sort of a 2-sentence from each of you, and this is a bit of a challenge. One, how do you respond to the observation that news creators are essentially remixers? And the second, if you had kind of a top tip, aside from don't blow up so many resources, what would it be for traditional news media organizations? Do you want to
Oh boy,
kick it
starting
off?
with me. Well, I think, so on the, tell me the first one again. I want to go.
The first one is, are news creators essentially news remixers?
Oh, yeah. Yes, they are. Yes, absolutely. But I see that as a feature rather than a bug. And I think the audience appreciates that there is still this kind of underbelly of close to straight news reporting. And we're layering opinion, hopefully, in an authentic and genuine way. And I think that's actually the appeal and sort of like the parasocial relationship. And does a person's personality resonate with the audience? I think that's a feature rather than a bug. And tell me the second part.
Top tip.
Top tip. Okay, the top tip is just start creating the content right away. Okay. There's so many conversations I have with people who want to start, and they're asking me about publicists, and they're asking me about microphones and lighting and who can print their merch, and all of this stuff is completely irrelevant. The number one thing is get the content onto the platforms as quickly as possible, start getting feedback, iterate based on that. That's really the big thing you have to do.
Yeah. Super.
I'll say what he said. I do think that certain creators are remixers, and I see a difference between a creator and a journalist. And as long as you say what you are, then I'm okay with it. But there are some journalists who aren't doing journalism, and there are some creators who are actually doing a good job at journalism. So I don't think that there's one or the other. I just think that both can coexist, and that we have to adapt to the new environment. What I would say is perfection is boring. And so if you're going to do it, again, what he said, just do it, and don't worry about it being perfect. And don't let, perfect be the enemy of the good? I think that's, and have integrity.
So, yeah, I mean, as far as us being remixers, obviously, we're not the ones who are doing a lot of the core reporting. I think that's always been true. And so sometimes we're spotting a buried lead in paragraph 19 that may be, not elevated in a way that we might find interesting. And I think that is a real service. But to pretend that the legacy media doesn't have a continuing role is silly. I think the question you asked was about tips for the legacy media,
yes.
Correct? So the tips for the legacy media, and I think the number one thing for the legacy media is acknowledge your bias. I think that the legacy media are constantly suggesting that they're fully objective, floating above the fray, fully capable of removing themselves from the sort of day-to-day politics. And I admire the attempt by many people to do that. I actually do think that that's a useful thing, and I think journalistic practices are necessary. But it also happens to be that if you want to know the number one critique of legacy media from the right, and this has been true for decades, all the errors fall in the same direction, and yet we keep hearing about objectivity. If all the errors are going in one direction, and we keep hearing how objective the journalists are, we start to doubt that you're telling us the truth, not just about your own objectivity, but about everything you're saying. And so I think one of the things that, I'll mention my friend Barry Weiss, I think what Barry is trying to do at CBS News is quite good, actually. I think bringing on people of openly political views from different perspectives to discuss issues is really important, and I hope that more legacy media institutions would acknowledge how polarized we are, and the way to solve the polarization is not to ignore it, is to host conversations between people who disagree.
Tara, final
yeah, I would say I still do think about I still think about what I can offer that's new, that hasn't been reported, and why you might find value in my channel. So I do actually call sources. I do try to break stories. Some days they're big, some days they're not. Some days it's news analysis. Some days I'm just calling sources on the Hill and trying to make sense of the last election. And you know, I'll write something on Substack and I'll host a show. Obviously, the Epstein story has been really big, but I also was covering that really closely when a lot of people weren't for the past 6 years. So I've been able to offer new reporting, new analysis, and exclusives. But yeah, I believe the legacy media has a huge value. I do use their reporting as support for my reporting, and often it leads to future reporting. And in some ways, yeah, we're remixers. But like you said, people want to feel like there is, they like you. They like your personality. They like the way you call shots. I think we need more referees, honestly, than we need to have people on tribes online. And I try to be a referee. That's how I see myself in this game. And yeah, I'm a person, of course. We all grow up with our biases just by the fact of, you know, being a first-generation American. I'll have a bias because of that, and it's subconscious. But I try not to bring it, you know, into everything. So that's my angle for this world. And my tip is to do it. Exactly. You know how many people? I'm sure it's the same thing. People ask all the time. I want to do what you're doing. Okay, well then just put a camera in front of your face and start talking. That's the first step.
I didn't hear the question. You said what was
to legacy
advice to legacy media. Oh, well, my advice. I agree.
Don't fire Don Lemon.
I agree somewhat. Well, that's true. Thank you very much. We agree on a lot. And I do agree somewhat of what you said. So this is a conversation that we used to have when he would come on my show. But I don't think that journalists are as biased, maybe as you think. I have a different opinion of what's happening at CBS. But my thing would be for the corporation to get out of the newsroom.
Yeah.
Because the problem is not with the journalists. It's with the gatekeepers. And if the corporation becomes the gatekeeper, then there's going to be constant influence from the people that we're supposed to be holding accountable, like the people in Washington, D.C., the people who own things, the wealthy people, the oligarchs, the billionaires. Those are the people that we're supposed to be holding accountable. Sure. And if they are filtering, if we are getting information that's filtered through them, and we must do that, or legacy media, then the game is over.
And also just the deal making for you know, just to get the interview, the scoop, it's just so political, right? Inside of the newsroom.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about what we're creating. We create our own newsrooms.
And lose the desk. Completely at time. Big round of applause, please, for our news creators today. Thank you all very much.
All right.
Wow, amazing discussion, everyone. I want to mention that the Reuters journalists have to adhere to the Reuters trust principles, which is something that, having come from many years as a broadcast journalist behind an anchor desk, has been very impressive to me. And I would even point out, I spoke to a newly appointed reporter who covers the beauty beat. She can't even receive like an eyeshadow for free. That's how committed we are to making sure that we are free and fair in our reporting. Next up, a fantastic discussion, more to come. Next up, we have Reuters editor-in-chief, Alessandra Galloni, who is returning to the stage, this time in conversation with Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales.
Hello again.
Right. Hello. Not again for the first time.
Not again for you, but again for me. Feels different in the afternoon rather than the first thing in the morning. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, obviously, Jimmy needs no introduction, founder of Wikipedia.